Hi, welcome to Bastards of History, where we discuss some of the lesser-known bad guys of history while in a bar. We explore each of these dubious and ethically challenged characters in 20 minutes or less, and of course, at the end, I'll give you our ranking for each historical figure on the scale of bastardness. For today's Bastard of History, we are headed to the Middle Ages and the lands of Albion. That is, the Kingdom of England, for the life of Thomas Wolsey. So, let's make a drink and get started. Thomas Wolsey was born in 1473 in Ipswich in Suffolk County, England, northeast of London and near the east coast of the island. There is some debate about the specifics of his early life, but the consensus is that he definitely had humble origins, especially compared to the high roller status he would later achieve. As a young man, Wolsey studied theology with the intent on becoming a priest. Holy men in the Middle Ages have a pretty spotty track record, so let's see where this one goes. In 1498, Wolsey was ordained as a priest in Marlborough in County Wiltshire. Yes, that's Marlborough, like the cigarettes, for those of you wondering. He held a number of clerical positions within the church hierarchy, of which we know little. But Wolsey began to rub elbows with some of the wealthier members of society, and even served as the executor of a high-ranking noble's estate. After that guy died, he then began working for King Henry VII. That's King Henry VII, not Henry VIII. Henry VII was a very prudent and well-regarded king of England. Henry VIII comes a bit later. But back to our man Thomas Wolsey. Here we have a holy man who's about to get into politics. Religion and politics. I'd say that's a healthy combination that won't go terribly wrong at all. Thomas Wolsey was appointed to the position of royal chaplain, a very respectable position in the English monarchy. And here's the kicker. Wolsey received this position with King Henry VII partially due to his lower status, on account of the king's genuine interest in promoting people from humble origins, as opposed to the existing noble class. So, good intentions were definitely at play, and we all know where those lead to. But it is important to note that Thomas Wolsey's remarkable rise is not just some sort of government handout or social justice move in an era where literally none of that existed. No, Wolsey was hardworking, intelligent, and genuinely deserving of this opportunity in a world where people like him were generally treated horribly by the powers that be. So, for those American patriots put off by all this lobsterback business, that's right, I said lobsterback. Look it up. Here is the early life of Thomas Wolsey. Born of humble origins, early interest in theology, hard-working social climber, becomes involved in politics, promoted to a prestigious position at a young age. So, how the hell did this guy end up on our list of bastards of history? Well, King Henry VII died, and his son took over. Let's see what happens next. In 1509, King Henry VIII succeeded his father as King of England. Yes, the Henry VIII who had so much wife drama that often culminated in him chopping their heads off. But we are not here to discuss that well-known fat fuck. We are here to discuss his lesser-known chief advisor. So where did that leave our man Wolsey? Well, at the start, it went super well for him. Wolsey was even given a position on the Privy Council, which was essentially King Henry VIII's most exclusive group of advisors. Think Game of Thrones, but without the dragons and less magic, but probably still the same amount of incest. In his early years, Henry VIII showed a general lack of interest in the specifics of government, and this created an opening for our man Wolsey to really burrow his way deeper into the young monarch's council. The holdovers from Henry VII's Privy Council were cautious, considerate, and practical, and Henry VIII was not down with any of that. The newly crowned king quickly began stacking the Privy Council with people who agreed with him. This could be problematic. And our man Wolsey picked up on this cue, that Henry VIII, the son of a king who had now become king, didn't like being told no, or that his ideas were no good, or that he should consider other perspectives than his own. I know, what a shock. Gee, this whole inherited monarchy thing has some pretty obvious pitfalls. How did Wolsey take advantage of this situation? Simple. He deftly adjusted his positions to mirror that of the king's, and he found clever ways to reinforce Henry VIII's own perspectives. He didn't come across as a blatant sycophant, because Henry VIII was definitely not dumb, and would have caught on to this. Wolsey found a way to tell the king what he wanted to hear, while also making it sound like good, reasonable counsel, which, I must admit, is a pretty impressive ability. Amidst his meteoric rise, Thomas Wolsey was also very devious. He skillfully maneuvered and successfully orchestrated the downfall of other councillors, which led to the resignation of the Lord Chancellor, who had been a holdover from the prior king's reign. And who did Henry VIII appoint to replace his father's choice for Lord Chancellor? I'll give you one guess. So, come 1515, Thomas Wolsey is now Lord Chancellor of England, an extremely prestigious position that came with real power. He basically controlled the government with the king's blessing. Not only do we have a holy man who has shown a remarkable ability to rise within church ranks, but Wolsey is also making a ridiculously successful run at a political career, all from humble origins. It's remarkable, truly, but also very likely to backfire in a volatile environment. His positions in the church came with great financial benefits, and Wolsey ended up making at least £35,000 per year. I put that into an inflation calculator, and for those of us Americans who don't know shit about what happens outside of our own borders, £35,000 in 1515 equals about 44 million US dollars in 2026. That's what he made in a year. Good God, he makes Wall Street look tame by comparison. And like a lot of good holy men over the years, Wolsey's next great act of genius, after lining his own pockets of course, was to push for a war with France, something he had previously opposed but Henry VIII wanted. But unlike the other folks on the Privy Council who resigned in protest, Wolsey simply went along with the new boss's desires, and thus we got the Anglo-French War. You know you're a real holy man when you start a war. Nevertheless, this was a real opportunity for Wolsey to assert himself in the realm of foreign policy, an area where spiritual leaders are naturally well versed in. And the Anglo-French War ultimately did culminate in success for England and its ally, the Holy Roman Empire. And this brings us to what was arguably Wolsey's finest moment, the Field of the Cloth of Gold. In 1520, Wolsey put on what was a remarkable show of diplomatic pomp and circumstance called the Field of the Cloth of Gold. Even by pre-revolution French standards, this was considered extravagant and over the top. It featured the French King Francis I and Wolsey's boss, King Henry VIII, as well as 5,000 other members of the court and other attendees. It was a lavish display of wealth and downright flamboyant, meant to convey strength, resourcefulness, and power. And it sent a clear message to the continent of Europe that the Kingdom of England was a real player and could rise as an empire, which it would later do. And yet, even after this ostentatious display meant to bind England and France together, what was the result of this? Another war with France. Why? Because Wolsey judged that Spain and the Holy Roman Empire would be more powerful allies for England, which turns out to have been the correct decision. Because Charles V was a badass, and Spain was also very much in her empire era. So Henry VIII and Emperor Charles V beat the shit out of France and left the country reeling. Like, really, France was against the ropes. And now, thanks to Wolsey's shrewd diplomacy and strategy, the Kingdom of England was ready to dominate Europe and potentially the New World with her partner, Spain. After all, Henry VIII was married to Catherine of Aragon, who was Charles V's aunt. A new age of prosperity beckoned for England. But there was just one tiny problem. Despite having everything lined up for immense success, Henry VIII wanted a son, and Catherine of Aragon had not borne one that had survived infancy. So the king decided to throw all of this away on the account of his dynastic obsession, and this brought us to the turning point for our man Wolsey. See, all that pandering to Henry VIII's wants and desires, along with Wolsey's genuinely successful track record, made it seem to the king that his chief advisor could make anything happen. So, Henry VIII told Wolsey to go get him an annulment from the Pope so that he could toss Catherine of Aragon to the side and marry another woman. But the problem was that Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, was the fucking nephew of Catherine of Aragon, and he was pissed that his ally was now abandoning his aunt who had been faithful to her husband. So, the emperor pressured Rome not to grant an annulment. So, Wolsey, who had been slaying it to this point, was suddenly given an impossible task. Nevertheless, he threw himself into it, as he always did. He claimed Henry VIII's marriage to Catherine of Aragon was in violation of the Book of Leviticus. I'm no biblical scholar, but I decided to reread that Old Testament text. You know, the one that says, don't eat certain animals, don't wear clothes of 2 types of material, and don't get tattoos, all of which Christians have been ignoring for centuries, but the part about forbidding man-on-man relations really stuck for some ridiculous reason. Wolsey's argument centered on the fact that Catherine of Aragon was a widow when she married Henry VIII. But everybody knew that, including Henry VIII, and he still married her. So this argument was like a circular train wreck. It's like he violated the scripture when he married her, and then later on wants to use the same rule that he ignored to then get his marriage invalidated retroactively, just so he can go hit another piece of ass? Needless to say, the political pressure of Charles V, along with the ridiculous nature of the English side's argument, left the Pope uninclined to grant an annulment. And so, Henry VIII, who had trusted Wolsey and given him free reign over so much of his kingdom, turned on the guy. And who was egging Henry VIII on, whispering doubts into his ear? Anne Boleyn, his side piece, and the woman he would later marry. And then when she also couldn't produce a male heir, she got the axe. Literally. And I don't mean the body spray. What followed was an English split with Rome, coinciding with the Protestant Reformation. The Church of England would later be formed. Those are the martini-sipping wasps we call Episcopalians nowadays. I don't promote specific religions on here, but I do admire their drink preferences. Thomas Wolsey was steadily stripped of his leadership positions and eventually accused of treason. This was, of course, a ridiculous charge and totally baseless. But that's what happens when a ruler with absolute power has had his ego aided and abetted by his top advisors. Wolsey was brought back to London, but before he could be executed, he died of illness. Yeah, the timing is suspicious as fuck. In politics, there's no such thing as coincidences. Yet, the official line is that Wolsey died before he could be tried for treason. As an aside, I have long indulged a hunch that Henry VIII let Wolsey go off into exile or obscurity and live the rest of his days in peace. I don't have any evidence other than the absurdly convenient timing of his natural death. And to those who think I'm crazy for thinking this, do you also really think Ken Lay from Enron died of a heart attack right before his trial? you know he's on a beach somewhere, right? And so, Wolsey's story is a fascinating tale of ridiculous upward mobility and prudence, along with corruption and personal enrichment, while failing to recognize that his enabling of Henry VIII's ego and self-delusion could also cost him his own position. I had a history professor who was obsessed with the history of England. Like, he could quite seriously tell you every English monarch and the years of their reigns, and even Henry VIII's favorite food. I did a 20-page paper for his class, and while there is a lot of attention on Henry VIII's obsession with having a son and the corresponding schism with the Catholic Church, not enough attention is placed on the geopolitical consequences of this split. Wolsey had really orchestrated something that would have set England up big time. A lasting alliance with Spain, closer relations with the Habsburgs, and a weak France would have made England an even bigger juggernaut than they became. But Wolsey's inability to secure the annulment and or to properly counsel Henry VIII the way Tyrion Lannister did in Game of Thrones ultimately set him up for downfall. So, what is Thomas Wolsey's ranking on the scale of bastardness? We give him the absolute lowest ranking, a self-interested shyster. And I don't think you can really blame us. He was very manipulative and self-motivated, but he also worked very hard at his craft. He was very smart and had a modest upbringing. He was corrupt, sure, but he also genuinely served his king and sought to improve the lives of his countrymen. And ultimately, he was done in by the same sort of insane obsession that drove Henry VIII to execute multiple wives. He is a fascinating figure who is not discussed enough, and this coincides with the lack of interest and the geopolitical ramifications of England's split with Rome. Don't agree with our ranking? Go down to the comment section and tell me why I'm wrong. And while you're there, please hit the like button and subscribe so that we can keep making these. Have a specific bastard of history you'd like us to cover? Go back down to the comment section and tell us which one you'd like. Until next time, keep calm, drink on, and maybe don't be a bastard like Thomas Wolsey.